Good morning, everyone. I'm Karen Crompton, President of Voices for Utah Children. I'd like to welcome you to today's forum, A Common Foundation, Creating Opportunity for the Next Generation. I think you'll find it a very interesting day and just the beginning of the discussion, actually. We don't want to start and end here. This is an important launching point as we move forward. I'd also like to thank our two major event sponsors, American Express and Zions Bank, which made it possible for all of you to attend at no cost to you. So thank you. And I'd also like to thank Intermountain Healthcare and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for also helping with expenses related to the event today. So what are we here today? We're here to talk about poverty, but we're really here to talk about more things than just poverty. It's about how do we create opportunity for the next generation. You know, there are kids that we all like to think about, and I call them Mighty Oaks. OAK stands for Overcome Anything Kids. We like to read about them in the newspaper, and we love to see all those great warm stories of how they overcame all odds and thrived. But in reality, those kids are a really small part of the population. We know that kids who come from less affluent families, even by the time they enter kindergarten, are starting behind. The average vocabulary of a low-income child is 3,000 words fewer than his counterpart. A new book out about what do children need to succeed talks about the word deficit. A lower-income child does not have the same engagement with family members and others and hear as many words. And they've estimated that more affluent children have heard 34 million more words by the time they enter first grade. That's a pretty big deficit to overcome. When we drive with data, we can build a compelling narrative. We can tell stories of how people and communities are affected by policies. That improves our ability to advocate for better policies. And what do I mean when I say that good data can drive good policy? Well, first, good data can draw policymakers' attention to important problems and identify solutions. Second, good data can also improve the policies and practices that are already in place. There are a lot of things we do really well, and maybe we should do more of them. The other reason that we think SB 37 was important legislation is because it talks directly to the issue of poverty, which gets almost no attention. You don't hear it being talked about very much at the national level or even in the state and local races that are taking place right now during this election cycle. I would just remind all of us to think about this, that no child ever did anything to make themselves poor. Our conversation today, again, is about more than ending poverty. It's about creating opportunity for today's kids. To do that will require sustained attention and creativity and focus on the part of all of us, which includes government, communities, business, schools, families, and all of us individually in this room.
This is an effort, folks, to be disruptive. Is that okay? We've heard some about that in business and education, and I think we need to begin to be disruptive when it comes to our poverty welfare policies. I'm not going to fill this with data. I'll be introducing Rick Little, who will share data. I'm not going to define a number of terms that need to be defined. I'm also going to leave that for Rick to do. Today, over 51,000 children living in Utah are trapped in intergenerational poverty and welfare dependency. They are preceded by earlier generations which were also subjected to poverty and welfare dependency. This is a result of both a lack of understanding and interventions, not differentiating between situational and intergenerational poverty and welfare policies, and programs not adequately focusing on children. These innocent children cannot choose different outcomes because they do not fully comprehend, nor do they control the consequences of the poverty welfare cycle they're being subjected to and victimized by. Once they are young adults, they often do not know how to survive any other way outside the poverty welfare cycle, they have been inculcated into. Often after suffering the debilitating consequences of their intergenerational poverty welfare upbringing, they eventually expose their own children to the poverty welfare cycle, continuing the attending crippling consequences from generation to generation of children within their own families. All of us need to accept responsibility for what has been done to successive generations of children who have been wronged by failed adult decisions, policies, and programs. The adult failure to rescue these innocent children from an inadequate welfare system cannot be compensated by any other societal successes. If we are to be a just and fair society, we must rescue the children from failed intergenerational welfare policies and programs, and we must do so now.
This is a unique opportunity for us in state government to come and to share information and also to be somewhat of a charter member in establishing an innovative approach to looking at poverty. While it looks as a positive thing that Utah has a rate that is lower than the national average, it is still a rate that continues a somewhat upward trend overall. Utah ranks 18th nationally with the 2010 data with respect to, we have the 18th lowest poverty rate. That said, it's still a lot of people affected. In looking at children, we see a very similar trend. And Utah ranks 12th nationally. And while things seem to have leveled out a little between 2010 and 2011, it's still 1 in every 6 children that are affected by poverty in the state of Utah, and certainly more than that nationally. As well, as was mentioned earlier, Senate Bill 37 in the last legislative session, the Intergenerational Poverty Mitigation Act, requires the agency that I work for to establish and maintain a system to track intergenerational poverty-related data. And that's to do with these 3 things: to identify at-risk children and other groups, to identify trends, and then to assist caseworkers, social scientists, and government officials in the study and development of plans and programs. And why do we do that? Because we want to help individuals and families break the cycle of poverty. The Act establishes an annual report due not later than September 30th of each year. So we get to come back and measure these statistics on an annual basis, and that should be of great help to us in monitoring the results of our activities over time. This report will go to the governor, it will go to the Legislative Management Committee, and then it will go to the committee that Senator Reed mentioned, of which he is a member, the Economic Development and Workforce Services Interim Committee. This is the first report. The more impoverished a person is during childhood, the more likely that person is to receive public assistance as an adult. Similar to that, the longer adults experienced poverty as children, the longer they are likely to be in poverty as adults. Almost 36,000 children that received public assistance between 1989 and 2000 are now adults receiving public assistance. They represent 1 in every 24 Utahns of the same age group. 2/3 of these adults have children of their own. These 51,000 children are the 3rd generation receiving public assistance whose parents were also children receiving public assistance. And in looking at those teen girls receiving assistance, those ages 13 to 17, 1 in every 20 of those young ladies was expecting a baby in 2012. That's the 4th generation of public assistance that we can observe in the data. This data would allow us not just to identify individuals in the aggregate, but to identify them at the time they're receiving service, so that services might be tailored to improve outcomes for their children, outcomes around their education completion, high school, post-secondary, or some kind of vocational training, etc., to ensure that they have good and proper employment experiences. And then finally, to prevent unwanted pregnancy. These are just a few ideas, and I know that there are many more. Having information and data is one good first step for us to identify those that are vulnerable, and then to seek ways in which we might be able to serve them so that we interrupt this cycle of poverty.
So what I want to do here at the start of the day is sort of pull the camera back a little bit and give a broader inquiry into the question of poverty, especially childhood poverty, in the context of the recent evolution of the U.S. economy and U.S. labor markets, and in the context of recent research on the individual and societal level impacts of poverty and inequality more broadly. So I want to talk about four specific things, four specific related issues that I think provide some context for our discussion today. First, inequality has been becoming more pronounced in the U.S., and average incomes have been stagnating. Second, children are concentrated at the bottom in this increasingly unequal society. Third, childhood poverty has long-term effects for individuals. And fourth, inequality has wide-ranging effects, arguably, for society as a whole. Effective policy will improve the living conditions of the poor, but if it helps counteract some of the wider economic forces that are pushing us toward greater inequality, it will also have payoffs for people all along the income ladder. And I want to close with a quote from James Heckman, who in general is not a wildly interventionist kind of economist, but he's very impressed with the possibility of the gains of investment in this area. He says, "Investing in disadvantaged children is a rare public policy initiative that promotes fairness and social justice, and at the same time promotes productivity in the economy and in society at large."
Granite School District has had a preschool program in place for a number of years. We're up over 20 years now. And across the years, it's been a variety of different kinds of levels of quality. And we wrote for and were funded by the U.S. Department of Education for an early reading first grant, which the focus was really on literacy of children who live in poverty. And we learned so many things from that grant that we pulled all of those things forward and now have those things across our entire program, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. These children all achieved higher in elementary and middle school grades. There was less grade retention. We know that when children are retained in school, we up their chances of them dropping out. These children were less likely to be placed in special education. And I'm going to talk just briefly about that. We are finding those exact same kinds of results here in Granite School District, here in Utah. These children had a higher high school graduation rate. They also had higher rates of college attendance. They had higher literacy skills as adults. They were engaged in fewer violent and drug crimes. They were less likely to become teen parents. We've heard that theme across multiple speakers today. They had higher employment rates. They were more likely to own their own home. And just by chance, I happen to be sitting at the table with the Zions guys, and they have a higher rate of savings accounts. Go figure.
Opportunity Nation is a national bipartisan effort to expand economic opportunity and mobility. We emerged really as a result of hearing and understanding some of the statistics that Tom and Michael and others, and Rick and others have shared this morning, recognizing the increase in inequality, the decrease in mobility, and how toxic that was for our nation, and decided that we needed to bring together all actors in a way that was both aspirational, recognizing that America believes in and can achieve opportunity for all, but was also practical, which says, let's find a way for everybody to play a part, and let's make sure that we're working towards solutions that are based in data, and based in our current realities, and move forward from there to see how we can, step by step, bring all partners together to increase opportunity and mobility. What was important is really being able to begin to quantify and understand some of the different dimensions that make a difference in terms of how a person is constrained or expanded in their opportunity based on the communities they live. And so we look at the economy score, the education score, pardon the typo in red there, and then the community health and civic life score, which is a combination of a set of factors around what are the community assets and community connections, which we know from social capital data from Robert Putnam and others does contribute to a person being able to connect to good school or job opportunities as well. We really see the opportunity index as the potential for the common agenda that a group of stakeholders can take and say, we know that we all have different parts to play, but our goal is the same, to increase opportunity at the community level. So I hope that in your communities you will think about either learning about those scores, sharing the scores, and finding some way as opportunity generators to increase the scores.
At some point, we're going to need a lot of cheerleaders, and that's when we get to trying to pass legislation. So we hope you will be there, and many others will be there at our sides, trying to pass legislation that will make a difference for children. Again, I want to thank you for all that you do. Many of you have spent a lifetime of dedicated service and commitment to the poor. And in this effort, I would never want any of you to think that somehow what you have done and what you do is not important. What I'm trying to do is orient us in a given focus. And that's not exclusionary, but it provides a pathway that's manageable where we can make a difference if we'll start looking at it and acting a little differently. So thank you very much for all that you have done, what you're doing now, and what you'll do in the future to help those in poverty, and particularly those children in poverty. And we will adjourn at this point. Thank you.